American writer and civil rights activist James Baldwin said, "Precisely at the point when you begin to develop a conscience, you must find yourself at war with your society." Hi there, and welcome. My name's Eddie, my pronouns are he, him, and this is the first episode of Wolf Bites. I'm so glad that you've made it here tonight, today, or whenever you're joining, and I hope that you will enjoy. Now, this is going to be a long chat, so feel free to put this on in the background or sit back, relax, and take a listen. A little bit about me if you're new. I am a solitary, eclectic chaos practitioner with a specific interest in nature, spirit work, and bringing magic and the real world together in a fun, witchy, practical, and ethical way. And Wolf Bites is a new long format podcast style video series where we take a metaphorical conversational bite out of a topic regarding anything magical, spiritual, philosophical, or paranormal. You know, all the fun words. And what a better time to record this first video of Wolf Bites than on tonight's full moon in Sagittarius. And hey, blame it on my stacked ninth house, or the moon, or just me feeling in a particular mood, but I am in the mood to get a little bit political, a little bit philosophical, and a little bit spiritual too. So if you're feeling in that same mood, then shall we indulge in today's topic of deconditioning your mind? The topic word deconditioning is being taken directly from Ivy Corvus's, or Ivy the Occultist's, recent video on the subject of deconditioning. However, the ideas being discussed in this video have been baking in the oven of my mind for the past 2 weeks or so, probably since the last video I uploaded. And in these past few weeks, I've really been trying to figure out ways to connect all of these thematically and tangentially related thoughts on political philosophy and witchcraft and personal empowerment, all of these different things together in my mind. And I was starting to figure out ways to connect them together, but I was having a hard time figuring out what a good topic word that all of these thoughts would fall under would be. And so when I came across the word deconditioning, I thought it would be perfect. So thank you for that word, Ivy. And this is actually not going to be the last time I mention Ivy or her deconditioning video within this video. However, we are going to be putting a pin in that for now, and we are going to talk about everyone's favorite subject, ADHD. Specifically, my ADHD, so it's definitely everyone's favorite subject. Alright, so being for real now, I promise this is relevant to what I'm going to be saying later on in the video. So, I've been making videos on YouTube here for a handful of months now, and I gotta say that it is a lot harder than I originally thought it would be. And it's not hard for the reasons that I thought it would be either. And upon inspecting these various reasons, I noticed that most of them were directly linked to some of the ways that my ADHD physically or mentally manifests. And I don't want to get too far into it, but I definitely want to share one particular example that was just driving me insane. So, one of the banes of my ADHD existence is memory loss. And I've found ways to cope with that, but most of them involve self-soothing or stimming, if you are aware of that word. It's become a lot more popular to use lately. Basically, it's just repetitive movements or something like that to kind of help quell the physical or sensory or mental chaos that's going on somewhere else in your body. It basically helps you focus. And sometimes my body will just kind of automatically do self-soothing or stimming behaviors, and I won't even really notice that it happens. And I bring this up because sometimes when I would film, I would just be very obviously stimming, like in a very distracting way, like rocking back and forth or clicking together my bracelets like very loudly. And I wouldn't even notice it because I was so used to just doing it passively. But when you're in a setting like a video setting, it's not really the same as when you're talking to someone in person or like chilling with your friend in the car and like having a witchy chat. It's not really the same. It's kind of like a fake, unnatural setup. And I was struggling with that because, I would have to mask in ways that I usually just would not let myself mask because I don't want to mask if I don't have to. And, I want to be as authentic as possible. And I don't want to feel like I have to hide things like stimming. But at the same time, there's a point where it just becomes a distraction when you're watching a video, or where I just kind of look crazy, or where it's just annoying in the audio, from hearing like my bracelets, or from hearing, my voice get closer or farther away because I'm rocking back and forth the whole time and I'm recording this on my phone. So the audio isn't that great. And, there's just a lot going on that I would be so focused on not stimming that I would lose my train of thought because I wasn't stimming. And it was basically creating this negative feedback loop of bad ADHD experience. And it was impacting my ability to articulate my thoughts clearly. And I didn't like that. I wanted to change that because I consider myself to be a person who is on a magical, spiritual, and personal growth journey, right? And so when I'm faced with obstacles or challenges or things I need to heal or overcome or work through, I want to do that. I don't want to just turn a blind eye to it. So I wanted to fix this problem. And in order to fix this problem between, my ADHD and my content creation, so that way I could continue to do the things that make me happy, like share my thoughts and experiences and collaborate with people and talk with people in my comments and engage with people here on YouTube like I want to do, and like the things that bring me joy like that. In order to keep doing the things that make me happy, I need to figure out how to fix the things that aren't. And so in order to do that, what I really needed to do was assess my subjective situation and also the objective situation around me, like my ADHD, my realistic options for, filming, my realistic options for what types of content people will engage with, stuff like that. Basically, in other words, I needed to be honest with myself, but I also needed to be realistic, and I needed to come to a conclusion based on that. So that way I could transform my current situation and improve it. And so my solution was, of course, Wolf Bites and this podcast style series, and also doing more audio recording style videos. And big disclaimer, this doesn't mean that you're never going to see my face again. You're still going to see me around on this channel, but probably mostly when I actually have something to show you. This series is basically a replacement / improvement of my what would have been talking head style videos. But let's move on to what we actually want to talk about. So, have you ever noticed that there are these almost like stages to overcoming boundaries and making changes in your life? Sort of like in the same vein as the stages of grief. As in, they don't all have to appear, and they don't all always have a set order that they appear in. But there's as if there are these still recognizable stages to transformation. And I'm not sure what all of these stages would be, but I definitely know that doubt would be one of them. And I would characterize this specific type of doubt as one based in conscious or unconscious insecurity and fear. And I think even people who are used to change and personal transformation sometimes have to deal with these doubts because it's just part of the transformation process. And where I think these doubts come from is in the comparison between yourself and the accepted paradigm, or the status quo. You see, even the changes I've wanted to make with my video creation and making it more engaging and accessible to me as a neurodivergent creator, even this has bumped up against fears based in this type of comparison. For instance, even though realistically I know that these changes are better for me and therefore for my channel in the long run, the accepted status quo of witchy YouTube is talking right at the camera with some witchy background behind you and having this beautiful music and having a beautiful aesthetic. And there was even my status quo, my accepted paradigm, the truth that I accepted about myself and the expectations that I set for my channel and what I wanted. And so when I make changes that are better fit for me and what my motivations are and what my values are, that deviate from the accepted norm, I get this nagging feeling that maybe I shouldn't, that maybe I'm doing something wrong, that maybe people won't like what I'm doing by diverting from what I had been doing before and by diverting from their expectations of me. I am no stranger to these types of doubts, is what I'm trying to say. Not because I struggle with them every day and that I'm a victim of doubt, but because navigating through these doubts, in my opinion, is an essential part of the process of transformation and growth. As you progress and as you become more aware of yourself and therefore better able to distinguish your experiences of truth and reality from other people's and societies, it's easier to detach from the unhelpful or toxic narratives of others because you're aware that they are others' narratives. You are aware that they are a narrative. And it's easier to detach from a narrative when you are aware that it is a narrative and not just some floating, abstract, untangible, unchangeable truth just there within the universe that you can't do anything about. And look, I know that I just covered a lot of stuff right then, like my new video format, my ADHD, the process of personal transformation, but that's just the basics. And I bring it up not just to slide in some context as to the series and the channel changes, but also because, as I noted before, I think this is incredibly relevant to the topic of deconditioning, and I'm about to get into why. Recently, I watched a video by Elliot Sang called Dark Empath, A Hot New Personality. And Elliot is not a witchy creator by any means, but I really like a lot of the videos that he had to make, and this one looked interesting, so I took a look at it. And if it sounds even mildly interesting to you, I have it linked in the description below, so definitely go watch it, because I'm not going to be talking about dark empaths in this video, but I am going to be mentioning one of the sources he used at the very end of his video, which is a 1968 book written by Paulo Freire titled Pedagogy of the Oppressed. A little background on Paulo and his book. Paulo is basically the founder of something called critical pedagogy, which is, and I'm really simplifying it here, it's a form of teaching critical thinking based on encouraging the learner to engage with multiple narratives. And this book, Pedagogy of the Oppressed, is about how oppressors, or those who hold power, have little to no incentive to change the status quo or to encourage engaging with something like critical pedagogy, because doing so might place the critical lens on themselves, which could directly threaten their established power, wealth, or lifestyles. And so, in order to maintain their established privileges and hierarchies, they employ false narratives and truths. And as a result, the oppressed, the people who do not hold established wealth or power, often don't unite against their oppressors. And the reason why is because these false narratives and truths limit one's perception of reality as it is. And therefore, people often are unable to perceive the very structures that hold them back. I know, it's pretty deep stuff, but it likely isn't new to you. Because even though you may have never read Pedagogy of the Oppressed, surely you've recognized this phenomena as a feeling or a subtle contextual presence looming behind the past and current understandings of history, of media, economy, and political status quo. Witches tend to be truth seekers, or on occasion, unintentional truth finders, but regardless, if you're watching this video, you're likely some shade of magical or spiritual or strange, and so you likely are some sort of the former. And the one thing that comes with this attribute is that we tend to find ourselves bumping up against the status quo, or perhaps breaking past it altogether. And there's something about a witch that makes them an inherently radical figure. I mean, they have this agency about them, this uncanny ability to transform the world around them and to see the world unveiled. Paulo talks about radicalization in Pedagogy of the Oppressed in a similar way, but it isn't the type of radicalization that you may be thinking. And I think that the best way to illustrate that would be to discuss the opposite of radicalization, something Paulo calls sectarianism. Sectarianism is one of those narratives or false truths employed or encouraged by the status quo. It is the projection of knowing others or a truth based on a single, often falsified narrative. Paulo says sectarianism, fed by fanaticism, is always castrating. Meaning that if you're unable to accept a different narrative from your own, or the one that you have been taught, or the one that you have accepted as a truth, this will ultimately always stifle your ability to create and transform and grow. But then he goes on to say that radicalization, nourished by a critical spirit, is always creative. And he also remarks that sectarianism mythicizes and thereby alienates. Radicalization criticizes and thereby liberates. So what does this mean? How does any of this whole pedagogy thing relate to witches and deconditioning? What does radicalization and a so-called critical spirit have to do with witches and agency and the ability to see beyond the veil and grow and transform our reality around us? Does this have anything to do with witchcraft or witches or magic at all? These are all very good questions. And with them in mind, I think it's time we go back to that pin I put in Ivy Corvus and her recent video on deconditioning. So in her video, Ivy talks about deconditioning, obviously, right? But she also noted something about the process of deconditioning and how it affected her. And I'm gonna splice the quote in from her video because I want you to hear it in her voice. I don't want to read it from her. I want you to hear what she has to say from herself. And I'll leave the whole video linked in the description, and I highly, highly recommend that you watch it. But I want you to hear the way that she describes what she experienced and the changes that she made and, you know, how she feels about it, really. So here's the quote.
When I began frequent and regular paradigm jumping or belief shifting, I went through this process that I can't quite articulate. I've tried to articulate it before in other videos, but something happened to my brain. It broke down barriers and it strengthened my ability to believe in whatever it is that I'm doing. The amount of confidence that I have in myself now to be able to manipulate my reality and go after the things that I want with the strongest conviction possible is astronomical compared to what it used to be. When a new idea, a new thought process, a new paradigm is presented to me, I have much less resistance and I'm a lot more open-minded to seeing all sides of the story, seeing all perspectives, and accepting that something else other than what I think could or could not be true.
Now, I can't tell what is more fascinating to me about this description, the fact that I can relate to it as a fellow chaos practitioner, or the fact that she is basically describing perfectly what Paulo talks about when he talks about radicalization of your mind. When Ivy discussed her ability to better engage with ideas outside of her own, it really reminded me of how Paulo describes the process of radicalization. Here's a quote, and I want you to compare this to what Ivy said about her own experience because I think it's really fascinating how similar these are. So here's what Paulo says about radicalization. He says, radicalization involves increased commitment to the position one has chosen, and thus ever greater engagement in the effort to transform concrete objective reality. Conversely, sectarianism, because it is mythicizing and irrational, turns reality into a false and therefore unchangeable, quote unquote, reality. And we'll get to that quote, but I want to continue. Paulo also said about the radicalized individual, the more radical a person is, the more fully they enter into reality, so that, knowing it better, they can better transform it. This individual is not afraid to confront, to listen, to see the world unveiled. And here we stand yet again at the subject of witchcraft. You see, that critical spirit that nourishes the radical mind that we were talking about earlier, it's not one that sees the one truth. It's instead a radicalized mind. It engages in a dialogue between the diverse layers of truth in both their objective and subjective parts. And in the process of doing this, what it's doing is engaging with the world through multiple narratives, multiple paradigms. And as a chaos witch, this stuff is practically par for the course. I mean, it's really second nature. And I think that its usefulness doesn't just end at chaos magic, because any witch or person can and should work to radicalize their mind, because what it really does is allow the groundwork for real understanding, real transformation, and real connection with oneself and others. In Elliot Sang's video on the dark empath, he notes how people who see themselves as said empaths, or who might be a dark empath, right, will often project themselves or their empathetic understanding of other people onto other people and then treat them accordingly, rather than actually engaging with others as individuals and treating them as the individuals that they are. And Eliot rightfully compares this to sectarianism. And I completely agree with that, but I also want to elaborate on it a little bit. So, when I was in college, I took a couple ethics classes, and I remember one time my ethics professor asked the class a question, and he posed it like this, and it really sticks out in my mind because of some of the things he said. He said, let's say that it's someone in the class's birthday, and I wanted to do a collective good, something equally positive for everyone. So I go out and I buy, uh, let's say a chocolate cake, and I cut it into equal portions, and everyone, including myself, gets a piece. And here's the reason why I really remember this. He then asked if anyone in the class considered themselves to be an empath, like to have an empathic psychic sort of ability. And a few people in the class, it was quite a large class, a few people actually did raise their hands. I was not one of them, by the way, but I remember he then said, "All right, so I want everyone in the class who thinks that this would be a collective good to raise their hand." And of course, most of the class would think that, you know, everyone getting an equal slice of chocolate cake is a collective good. So most of the class does raise their hand, including everyone who claimed to be an empath. And I remember he asked the people who claimed to be an empath if they were sure. And then, when they didn't change their answer or anything, he then went on to say that this would not be necessarily a collective good because he, in real life, is actually allergic to chocolate. And if he ate the amount of chocolate that would be contained within a slice of cake, it could rightfully kill him. And he said he asked if anyone was an empath because he figured if anyone was truly having an empathic ability, rather than just projecting their assumptions of other people onto them and then treating them as such, then logically, they would not have chosen to agree that this would have been a collective good because they would have known that the chocolate would not have been, a good choice for him. They would have been able to sense that off of him rather than just projecting how much they would have liked a piece of chocolate? And I find this memory to be interesting in so many ways, but I find it to be a very interesting connection to what Eliot had to say about dark empaths because I think that it proves something about sectarianism, that it isn't just a thing that dark empaths or like toxic people use or struggle with. It's also something that like normal people who just happen to consider themselves some form of empathic or clairvoyant or otherwise psychic also have to deal with. There is a responsibility that comes with having any sort of psychic or empathetic or clairvoyant ability, especially if you're going to claim that you have this type of ability and really lean into it, right? There is a responsibility that comes to it, especially in terms of sectarianism. And the responsibility lies in the ability to see reality clearly and free of illusions or projections. Because let's say you were one of those people who just happened to consider themselves an empath and you were the one who brought in the chocolate cake and somehow, the professor ate it without even noticing it was chocolate and inevitably something happened to him, right? Your inability to assess the situation using your empathic abilities. Like, let's say you did use your empathic abilities to decide if this was going to be a good idea, right? Or you tried to, but you were not seeing clearly. Then what you were actually doing was just feeling your own positive projections about, how good this cake is going to taste and how nice this gesture is for everyone, or maybe how much people will like you, or something like that, that you were unable to see clearly. And that clouded judgment actually had, in this case, potentially deadly consequences. And of course, this is a super overly dramatic example, but it's important to understand that the way we project our assumptions onto other people, the way we compartmentalize and label and alienate other people, the way we project and feel our own projections and use that as confirmation over others, this carries over from the real world into our magical practices. So radicalization is essential to being able to, as Paulo says, see the world unveiled. And what is a witch if not one who sees reality for all its glorious layers beyond the veil? You see, we tend to see the quoted veil as reality itself, but really the veil is the illusions and constructs, the status quo, the accepted paradigms that keep us from seeing reality. Radicalization allows us to see beyond by gifting us the ability to see to begin with. Because we cannot see beyond if we cannot first clearly see what is right in front of us. Radicalization allows for this practice to take shape. And radicalization does not see truth as completely objective, but as a dialogue between objectivity and subjectivity. It acknowledges that truth and therefore reality is diverse and also relative. Let's take, for instance, a solar eclipse. A solar eclipse is an example of objective scientific fact. You know, the type of fact that we deem as real fact, right? Because we don't typically see subjective as fact. We typically see truth as objective, and subjectivity is maybe truth, maybe not. But when I say subjective is part of truth, some people might say, well, that's not true. Truth is not relative. Truth is not subjective. Truth is objective. So let's take an objective scientific fact of solar eclipses and show how there are layers of truth and reality to it. Okay, so currently we live at a place and time where we can experience a total solar eclipse. This means that, the moon crosses over the sun, blocks out the sun completely. These can happen because we happen to live at a time and place where the moon is about 400 times smaller than our sun, and simultaneously the sun is about 400 times further away from the earth and moon. So when the moon passes over the sun, we perceive it as a total solar eclipse because they are like perfectly aligned, size difference wise, and length and distance wise. You know what I mean? All of that is perfectly aligned to be able to have a total solar eclipse. This is the current truth. This is the current objective scientific truth. This is our current objective reality. However, each year, the moon is actually drifting further and further away from Earth. Of course, this is incrementally, but millions of years from now, total solar eclipses probably won't happen anymore. And this is also a fact. This is also an objective truth. So which one is reality? Well, I mean both, right? But there are layers to this because there's this layer of subjectivity there. There's also a layer of relativity there. For instance, we can experience a solar eclipse on this planet within our lifetimes, but it's a relative experience compared to the solar eclipses that would happen millions of years from now. We can relatively experience our subjective experiences of the time and place and, coordinates that we're at, right? But we cannot say that for somewhere that we cannot experience. And maybe that was like a little bit confusing and a little bit heady or just not well explained. So a simpler example is kind of that classic, there's two sides to every story type thing, right? So, say you're reading a history textbook, like a mainstream history textbook. You need to be able to have that radical critical spirit while reading it in order to know that history is written by the victors, and oftentimes that means the oppressors. So you need to read the textbook with those layers in mind. This does not mean that the textbook is complete garbage and everything in it is trash and not true, right? But it does mean that there are other narratives that you are not reading within this textbook because it was not written by them, because it's not their narrative. So what a radical mind would do would be to seek out the people who are not being represented and listen to their narrative, right? So they're not throwing away the old history textbook. They are looking at other textbooks. They're listening to other stories. They're seeking other forms of information about the same time, about different people, about how other people interpreted this history, to then get a more broader, a more bigger picture of the actual history that took place. In essence, they're really seeing what the real truth is, or at least as close as they can get. They are seeing reality for what it was, not just one objective narrative. And so you need to engage with this dialogue between the objective and the subjective facts in order to perceive things as they are. And as Paulo says, once you better understand and see reality as it is, you can then transform it. This act of being able to control one's reality by being able to transform it is literally the hallmark of the witch archetype. It's kind of the whole point why I'm making this video. It's what makes a witch radical. It's what makes them liminal and powerful symbols against the status quo. Isha the Activist Witch recently posted a video on Catholicism and witchcraft and colonialism, and in it there was a quote that I'd like to share a few bits and pieces of in regards to how the figure of a witch was perceived by the church, which is basically a status quo hierarchy upholding system, you know, one of those systems that are hard to perceive that I was talking about earlier. The quote goes, "The witch puts an inordinate power in herself, or seeks to harness power that is not granted to humans according to their nature. She wants to affect the world and people around her. She is dissatisfied by the fullness of the humanity given to her by God." In order to unpack this, we need to take a look at the second issue that sectarianism mindsets can cause in our witchcraft and spiritual paths, you know, aside from the sectarianism I was talking about with, you know, empaths and all that. The next one, and the bigger one, is the whole of one truth narratives. One truth narratives are similar to the forms of interpersonal sectarianism that we've already covered, but this time, instead of projecting falsehoods or assumptions of reality onto others, the one truth narrative projects its assumptions of truth and objective reality onto truth and objective reality as a whole. This is the quoted false reality that Paulo was talking about when he said that sectarianism creates a false and unchanging quote-unquote reality. These falsehoods are often masqueraded as truths or laws of the universe or expectations of greater society, like the expectation to do aesthetic talking head videos on witchy YouTube instead of whatever this is. But in magic, it can look like a whole bunch of things, so I'm going to list some and let me know if any of these sound familiar to you. So, someone telling you there is only one true God or religion. Someone saying that their tradition is the right way to do magic or the right way to be a witch. That you're doing your spell wrong if you blow out your candle instead of quench it, or if you use whatever ingredient after whatever time, or etc., etc. Or they say that this correspondence means this, so you can't use it for that spell. This goddess only likes this, so you can't offer her that. This god hates that god, so don't put them next to each other. It will only work if you spin around 3 times after midnight. It'll only work if you do this. A green witch does this, a chaos witch does that. If you do more of this than that, then you can't call yourself this. You see what I'm getting at here. All of these are one truth narratives. They are what Ivy called in her video limiting beliefs. And indeed they are limiting, because all of these are examples of non-radical sectarianist thinking. And as noted before, sectarianism is always castrating, meaning that these beliefs, these one truth narratives, will always stagnate you. And so in terms of witchcraft, this could mean magical or spiritual stagnation. So, going back to that quote from Misha's video, I think that witches need to put that inordinate power in themselves. They need to take truth and therefore reality into their own hands in order to use the transformative powers of magic to change objective reality and affect those around them. And in spite of the perceptions of the church or the status quo, I think that the witch is dissatisfied not by the humanity given to them by God, but by the illusions imposed on them by hierarchies of people to keep them from achieving their fullest potential. A witch is dissatisfied because they are living proof that the power they hold is accessible to humans given their nature, and that these so-called limitations of their nature are not enforced by God, but by those who seek to undermine the witch's ability, everyone's ability, to create change and to affect reality. To the status quo, a person with agency like this, with a conscience like this, is a dangerous alchemical force. Chaos magic or not, witch or not, radicalizing and deconditioning your mind is essential to being able to be realistic and to make necessary changes to fix real world problems, be that through magical or mundane means. We cannot afford to be blinded by the veils of illusion and projection. We need to be radical. We need to engage with life and others honestly and fully and with a curious and critical spirit. We must admit that we don't know and be excited to find out. We cannot see beyond if we cannot first see what is right in front of us, and we cannot transform what we do not interact with. But with that, I think that's enough for now. I hope you've enjoyed this chat. And if you want to continue this discussion, I would love to hear from you in the comments. Links to all sources and some extra sources will be in the description of the video, so please check those out if you like this topic and you want to learn more. If you made it this far, go ahead and leave me a like to let me know that you're here, and subscribe if you haven't already. Let me know what you think about this new video series too, and this new sort of format. And with that, take care, and I'll see you in whatever I make next. Goodbye.